Washington is on their way to the Sugar Bowl. They're the number 2 team in the country.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another Sunday edition and another live edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We are for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. Thank you for making this whatever watch or listen to the day it is for you. I wanted to say first, but it's not going to be the first today since people probably watch the college football playoff rankings before tuning in with us, especially since it came earlier. And just a reminder to everybody that this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Lars Hanson, just initial reaction to Washington being the number 2 team and having to go play in the Sugar Bowl. What you got for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of the unfortunate path that UW has been on where, yes, there was an argument to be made that they should be the number 1 team over Michigan, but let's be real. I don't think that was going to happen. If they were going to jump Michigan, it would have been this past weekend. And the fact that they didn't, I mean, it's also unfortunate because of the 2 bowl games they're going to, one's on the West Coast and the other's all the way down south. There is no middle ground. There isn't like, Allegiant Stadium or even somewhere in Texas. It's a little further south, so the fact that, they got to go prove it almost one more time to have a right to play in the national championship is unfortunate, but it's also on brand for what this team has had to do this year. And so I think if anything, I mean, you would rather, first of all, I think probably draw Texas than draw Michigan or Alabama. I think, if you're Washington, hey, we'll let the other 2 kind of sort that out and see who we have to face in the championship. But having beat Texas with a lot of the same players last year, Texas, surprisingly, I was looking into the numbers. Texas has given up twice as many sacks as Washington has. So, I mean, it's an apropos, opportunity for Washington to kind of use all the talent. You get a month off almost, get everybody healthy. And I would be surprised if they don't win the game, but I mean, they certainly got a long way to go to get there.
And speaking of which, Washington opened as 4.5-point underdogs in this game, which, I mean, it's something we've seen on Twitter. You and I have talked about it a little bit off air, and just how tough it's going to be for Washington fans to get to Texas for the most part, especially for people up here, which is a real bummer. Because I know you and I both had plans in place already for the Rose Bowl, all that sort of stuff, which is a bummer just from the perspective of what you and I do and how much harder it makes it on you and I. And that's, just to say the least from just the general fans perspective of what it's like for when right now, it looks like it's going to be very, very difficult for a lot of Husky fans to get down there. And exactly what you said, right? This isn't necessarily the best draw in terms of where they're playing, but you can't necessarily control that. And that's something where it hasn't bothered this team all year long. With whatever they're doing, this team has not, they haven't been swayed off their path by anything, whether it's being an underdog as a 10-0 team going on the road to Oregon State, whether it's being 10-point underdogs playing against Oregon, who they beat earlier in the season. No matter what it was, this team has found a way to win and to overcome it. And it does feel like that they're going to be able to do that again in the Sugar Bowl against Texas. But Texas is a really good team. And this is going to be a really, really fun matchup. And personally, I'm a little just, mad that Florida State didn't get in. And of course now, because this is something you and I talked about earlier in the year when Washington didn't necessarily, it didn't feel like some of their injuries were taken into account, following the Arizona State game, the Stanford game, and some of those things where now all of a sudden, oh yeah, they played in the conference championship game with their 3rd string quarterback. Taylor Rodemaker would be back for whatever bowl game that they play in, but that doesn't matter. That's its own ridiculous issue. But Washington playing Texas does feel like it's going to be a really interesting matchup. And right off the bat, we're going to get way more into this over the next month or so. But one thing that I'm really interested in is Washington's offensive line versus Texas's front 7, because their front 7 has been playing very, very well. And something that Kalen DeBoer talked about in his press conference that you and I just attended was he said, it seemed like we surprised some people with our physicality. Kalen gave a big shout out to Dylan Johnson in that whole aspect. But I think that Washington is a very physical team and one of the more physical teams in the country. And no matter what people seem to say about that, they just seem to overlook the fact that the Huskies can run the ball down your throat and be very physical when they want to.
Right. And I mean, I think, the added motivator is right that you're underdogs, right? I think the fact that, to be fair, I think it did open as a 5.5 and then quickly went down to 4.5. But I would almost expect that to go down a little bit even further, maybe just a pick 'em game by the end, maybe a 1-point favorite for Texas at the end. But I think this team kind of just feeds off that. And, I asked Kalen DeBoer at the press conference, did you see the team prepare any differently? And of course, no surprise, he didn't say they prepared differently, but I think it's almost like the small detailed nuances of it, right? Where, we're not going to change our approach because we're underdogs, but after every practice, when, Penix breaks the huddle, Eddie breaks the huddle, guys, talk after practice, it's like, yeah, they're really disrespecting it. So it kind of adds that little extra fuel to the fire that's already burning inside, as Kalen DeBoer mentioned. So I think for this team that's been doubted all year, it's like, it would almost be weird if they were like 7, 8, 9, 10-point favorites against Texas. It's like, wait, why are all of a sudden people now expecting us to show up when we've showed up every game? Maybe some better than others, but we still got to go prove it again. And so I think it's honestly kind of it's appropriate for what this team has gone through this season.
No, I agree with you there. And that's just, something that helps write this story, whatever that story might be, whether win or lose this game. That's what it's been about. It's finding the best story with this Husky team. And the fact that they're consistently being doubted, no matter what it is that they show on the field, that just adds to the whole legacy of what it is that Kalen DeBoer is building. And having to go once, not nearly as, as close as San Antonio playing in the Alamo Bowl last year, but really having to go into Texas's backyard once again to have to do this for the right to play in Houston it's wild to think about that. And because you can get caught up on the Rose Bowl aspect of this all day long. Right. And that's one thing that I know I'm thinking about as somebody from Los Angeles who's really looking forward to doing that. But I feel like, even if this is the same game in the Rose Bowl, probably a similar spread. That's just kind of what it feels like. So I have a lot of thoughts and I don't necessarily know the best words to use there because some of them are kind of just crazy, because one of the other things that Kalen DeBoer talked about was he felt that there was an argument for this team to be the number one team in the country. And I kind of want to know your thoughts about that, because I think that especially when you look at strength of record, strength of schedule, that the Huskies do have a legitimate argument to have been in that top spot and to draw I don't know if it would have been an easier matchup if, say Alabama is still fourth, but to be able to go to the Rose Bowl and have a much better home field advantage.
Right. I mean, I think that was kind of the argument UW fans and just national media and people in general were having on Saturday night was, well, if you're Washington, do you want to go down south to the Sugar Bowl against maybe Florida State or Texas and have a better chance of winning the game? Or, again, whether they could still beat Michigan or Alabama regardless, right? If they play in the national championship game, that'll be the argument then. But at least, you're kind of already there. Whereas now you got to go down to New Orleans, kind of go out of your backyard. But it's unfortunate, but because, there certainly was a case to be made, right? You beat Oregon, a top 10 team twice. You beat USC, but they kind of fell off. Arizona wasn't a top 25 team when Washington beat them. So it was almost like a perfect storm of reasons why Washington didn't end up getting that number one spot. And I think more so it was a matter of Michigan didn't give the committee a reason to drop them down. Again, right. It wasn't a beautiful Big Ten championship game by any stretch of the imagination, but given the way the score turned out, it was 23-0,
26, I think it was. Yeah.
Right. So the fact that, Michigan did everything they could. Had it been like, 13-7 or, 14-10 or something like that, where it's a little bit closer and Iowa at least makes it somewhat of a game, then maybe Michigan drops down because you played worse against an inferior opponent, whereas Washington played up against a top 5 team. But I still don't think at the end of the day, as much as we both would have liked to see them jump to number one, I think if they were going to make a jump, it's more or less their initial ranking early. You go back and look at that first ranking, Penn State was ahead of Washington at 6. They finished with 2 losses. So maybe it's a message to the committee saying, hey, next season when we have those, 4 to 12 rankings that matter a little bit more, put a little more thought at the beginning of the rankings when they come out to say, hey, you could have had Penn State at 8 or 9 as an undefeated team, but knowing that they might, lose a couple of games here and there, that way you're not looking at it as, hey, Michigan beat the top, number 6 or number 7 Penn State team, where it's like, well, they're more like a number 10, 11, 12 than they are a top 10 team. So I think that's more or less where it hurt Washington in the end than anything else.
No, that's definitely a really solid argument there. And we've got so much more to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact that this has in the transfer portal and recruiting now that the Huskies are the number 2 team in the country. But first, we're going to give a shout out to our good friends over at LinkedIn, because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to have as many top tier candidates as possible to interview. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job billboard. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which make it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have that many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. And thankfully, with LinkedIn, the process is intuitive, quick, and easy. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So we've gotten tons of questions in the YouTube comments, on Twitter, just in stuff that we've written about the transfer portal, about recruiting, and how this is going to impact the just kind of whatever the class is going to be in 2024 between the two. And one guy that I really am interested in talking about is former 4-star recruit who just entered the transfer portal, Tobias Merriweather. Wide receiver, originally from Union High School down in the Vancouver area, that went to Notre Dame and now is transferring. And I think it's fair to say that Washington will certainly be in the mix for him. Do you think that that's because I think that if Washington wants to go get a guy like that, and it extends a little bit beyond Merriweather. He's just one of the examples that we can point to right now. Is just saying that's one of the guys that was really highly touted as a recruit. Went to a really good school, didn't necessarily work out for him there. I think that Washington has sent a message in the transfer, with everything that they've done this year, saying we're going to be winning here as long as Kalen DeBoer is here. And yeah, we're going to see a lot of roster turnover, but we can see them patch it relatively quickly in the transfer portal.
Yeah, I think Tobias is kind of an interesting situation because he had a pretty good relationship with Junior Adams, the UW receivers coach, when he was here coming out of Union High School. And it wasn't necessarily that like the family disrespected the university or that the university disrespected the family. It almost just kind of seemed like, hey, like, yes, Tobias could go to Washington, but in a similar JTT Emeka role, it's like, hey, actually, I'm going to go outside the state. I'm going to kind of go do my own thing. And it didn't work out. Obviously, Notre Dame fired its receivers coach about a week ago now. So maybe that had a little more to do with it than anything else. But I think if you're looking at Washington, you also have to consider who could they also bring in the high school class that's maybe committed elsewhere. We mentioned Aaron Butler taking an unofficial visit. These are all spots to where, okay, it's not necessarily straight up Tobias versus Aaron Butler, but you kind of have to weigh, well, okay, Giles is coming back. Does Jalen McMillan come back? Polk's probably gone and Dunes is probably gone. So how do the roster numbers work? And obviously, you have 3 freshmen that came in this year, so it's hard to see any of those guys leaving. Maybe one of them could, but I would be kind of surprised if they did that. At least at this point, I can see him. I can see one of those guys transferring after next season if they don't get a ton of playing time or any chance to crack the 2.
Maybe in the spring, something like that too.
Right, exactly. So that's kind of another situation where if you're Washington, unless you know for certain, and this isn't a knock on Tobias, right? But I don't think he necessarily is going into the portal as one of the most coveted receivers in the country, right?
Sure.
This isn't, and to be fair, Jeremy Bernard wasn't either, but he also went in with a no contact designation because he knew where he was going. So I think for Tobias, it's a little more of a case of, well, is there a room at Washington for me? Could I go to Oregon? Ashton Kozar entered the portal for the Ducks, so maybe he takes that spot. I mean, there's a number of different possibilities to see. And I think, Tobias would certainly be a welcome addition for Washington, right? He's a solid receiver, but it's a matter of, okay, well, is he going to be a solid receiver in the Jeremy Bernard role this season where he's kind of a compliment and kind of can just come in when needed because you have 3 guys in front of him? Or is he a guy that instantly can come in from day one like Jalen Polk did and have an impact? Jalen Polk came in and got hurt, but kind of have a bigger impact necessarily than Bernard had this year. And that's not a knock on Jeremy, right? We both know how good he is. But I think, if you're bringing in Tobias, you want a little more guarantee out of it.
So I think it's a different position, but a good comp in that sense would be, is he Dylan Johnson? That's so one of the reasons that's a very fair question to pose, and I agree with you. But the one thing that I can say, where especially and one of the reasons I want to make sure that we highlighted receiver when we talk about this is because of what you just said, where Rome is definitely going to go to the NFL draft. Jalen Polk is probably going to go to the NFL draft. Jalen McMillan, we're probably 50-50 on him, but with this late run, we wouldn't be surprised if he enters his name in the NFL draft. That is a lot of production that no matter who is playing quarterback next year. We talked about the possibility of it being a transfer like Cam Ward. We talked about it being Dylan Morris. We talked about being maybe Austin Mack or Will Haskell, where whoever that is, they're going to want somebody with some experience. And that's not that it's Tobias, but that's somebody where, get a spring and a fall camp with somebody like that with a little bit more experience, where he's already played at Notre Dame for 2 years. Hasn't played a lot, but he's played there in that Jeremy Bernard role. And that's something where, okay, we expect that he could take a step forward under a guy like Jamarcus Shepard. And then look at other guys like Jeremy Bernard and Denzel Boston and have that be a starting three receivers, where it's not a bunch of guys who have a whole ton of experience at the college level, but we see these as three guys with just immense potential, and that they could be a really solid receiving core. And I think that's the one position where we think that that's going to happen, where you can take a flyer on a somewhat developmental guy and hope that they turn into something. Whereas we look at other positions like potentially offensive line, defensive tackle is the big one that you and I have talked about, another linebacker, a safety, something like that, where we look at players at those positions and just say that, okay, those are going to be, those need to be the high impact guys if Kalen DeBoer and his staff want to just kind of keep this momentum rolling no matter what happens in the postseason.
Right, exactly. Because I think there's nothing wrong with getting a Will Nixon, a Raylan Goforth, Zach Durfee's kind of an unfair one to throw into that mix because he just wasn't able to be eligible for no fault of his own.
Right.
But there's a difference certainly between those type of transfer additions where you're kind of using them as a complement for depth and veteran presence and things like that, versus guys that you are like, hey, we're needing to replace Rome, Polk, and McMillan. Somebody has to step into that role, right? That there's a little more of a kind of guaranteed a sense of urgency, especially with, the Dylan Johnson one's perfect because if you have Cam Davis, his team is probably the number one team in the country. And without Dylan Johnson, if you don't get that addition and Cam Davis goes down, now you're really hurting because now your two backs are Will Nixon, Daniel Ngata, and Tybo Rogers. So, yeah, it's a matter of, is it the right fit? Because the other thing, too, on when you mentioned the safeties, is both of them can come back. Asa Turner and Cam Picciolano. And I think Dom Hampton's the only one guaranteed to not come back because he's out of eligibility.
Right. But even in that same vein.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, no. Just one extra addition, and I'm sure this is where you're going with it. I'm sorry if I cut you off. Vince Nunley, same thing. Whereas what's his status going to be? And getting somebody in that vein where I know you and I both really like Vincent Holmes, we like Diesel Gordon, but getting somebody who can be just an extra impact player at that position.
Right. It was honestly same with cornerback, right? Because if Jabbar Muhammad goes, yes, you have Curly Reed, who's a Louisiana native, so I'm sure he's relishing in the chance to go back home for the Sugar Bowl, but you don't really have anybody behind him. Again, Thaddeus Dixon looked good in the Pac-12 championship game, but you needed there isn't that sense of guaranteed, hey, I'm going to put like that you have with Jabbar Muhammad, right? Where you just know exactly what you're going to get, and you're pretty surprised if he has a bad player too. Whereas nobody else coming back on this team at the cornerback position, not excluding Michelle Powell, right? Because he moved to the Huskies, so it's a little bit different. But nobody really strikes you as saying, hey, that guy could step into the Muhammad role next year and lock it down, right? So that's why there's a level of portal addition to where it's like, hey, we can get some compliments, but we do really need more so those top end guys to replace, and we can sprinkle in with recruiting, like a Paul Menke Jr. and things like that, where, hey, maybe they don't play right away, but this is a good kind of stopgap fill, talent will come there maybe a year or two from now, sort of thing.
And no, you're right, because that was a good question that we got when I think it was one of our other live shows that we did, or it might have been in the YouTube comments, something where somebody asked, are we going to see Caleb Presley and Curly Reed in the Pac-12 championship game? And it was no, because are they really exciting high upside players? Yeah, absolutely. But it's just not time for that yet. And you take guys like that where it's a developmental 4-star prospect where we really like this guy. And we think a year or two down the road, he's going to be a huge contributor for us. But right now we just need to fill that gap. And that's something where I think a lot of college football fans, especially just kind of some of the older generations who didn't necessarily grow up with the transfer portal, might just say something like, oh, well, I don't like the transfer portal because you could bounce around, you can do this, do that. Where that's more of a, if coaches can leave, why can't players? That's a whole different argument. But it's something in the mold of the players need to do what's best for themselves sometimes. And you can look at a guy like, so somebody that you talked to, somebody like Joey Slackman that we just talked about at defensive tackle, where that kid is really talented. I think he has a future in the NFL from watching his tape. But NFL teams might be a little bit more willing to take that risk on him if he plays for Washington for a year in the Big Ten than he is coming out of UPenn. Or that's a very different conversation. And it's the same thing with Jabbar Muhammad, where there might be some more questions if he stays at Oklahoma State, where defense is not necessarily prevalent, than it is where now that he's making a run to the Pac-12, or excuse me, to the college football playoff with Washington, where now that's a very different conversation that he can be put in terms of what he can do at the NFL level. And we've got a whole lot more that we are going to talk about. But first, we gave a shout out to our friends at FanDuel already, and we're going to do it again right here because as the weather gets colder, the NFL offers are staying hot on FanDuel right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel is an official partner of the NFL. And just a reminder to all you Husky fans out there that right now, Washington is still 4.5-point underdogs. And if you want to slam that line right now, I don't think Lars and I would necessarily discourage that in any way is probably the best way to say that.
Yeah, that's accurate.
Nah, couldn't agree with you more there. So we got a question here that this one, if anybody, we appreciate all the everydayers that are down there in the comments here. Got one here from Greg Stone. Is there any chance Cam Davis is available for the college football playoff? Sadly, probably not. We won't really disclose, what we've heard about the injury, but from what Lars and I have both heard, there's probably not going to be much of a chance for that. But yeah, that would be a tough one to have there. And Lars, is there anything that you really want to, as we kind of circle back around to the Sugar Bowl, is there anything that you're really looking forward to about just anything regarding this matchup?
Well, I think it's more the not the extracurriculars, but kind of the fact that there's never been, to Kalen DeBoer's point, there's never been a Pac-12 team in the Sugar Bowl. And there's certainly never been the one that's won it, right? Because it was always a bit SEC heavy, usually SEC, Big 10 or Big 12 bowl game. So the last team, I believe, west of Texas that's appeared in the game was Utah in the mid to late 2000s. And I believe I saw Air Force was on there, or one of the academy schools was on there at one point, but that was even further back. So I think this is kind of a big opportunity for Washington, especially moving into the Big Ten, where you're going to want to draw on that East Coast audience next year. And I asked Kalen DeBoer about that at his press conference, and he's like, well, we've been on TV a lot this year, especially the back half of the season, so people can see us. This is almost just another opportunity. I did a kind of a quick search. It doesn't look like Washington has offered any recruits from Louisiana in the 25 or 26 class. I could be wrong on that. But with or without that fact, getting that extra exposure, right? Going down to Texas and having recruits see you in Texas, going down to Louisiana and kind of just the general South part of the country, opens recruits' eyes, it opens players' eyes to, hey, wow, these guys are actually pretty cool. And then now, oh wow, now they're showing interest in me. Oh yeah. So that's kind of how recruiting and that stuff builds. I mean, Washington is still always going to be a big California school, and they're going to do stuff like that. But I also think in general, when you're playing for a college football playoff, going back to our point about the portal, guys see that. I mean, Dylan Johnson mentioned that last year. It's like, hey, they beat Texas, they went 11-2, they're clearly a good team. And he chose them over Auburn, right? And that turned out to be a good decision for him. But at the time, it's like, wow, you're turning down Cadillac Williams and running backs, Auburn's running back coach. to go all the way out to the state of Washington when you're from Mississippi. But the more you start to win and the more Kalen DeBoer kind of gets known nationally and the longer he stays in Washington, the better and easier it's going to be for them to recruit guys west of the Midwest, or east of the Midwest, I should say. And I'm not saying that's going to be a huge part of the recruiting base, but I think it's kind of proven that you want a few guys from around the country that have a different mindset and makeup to add to your team. You don't have to go recruit 10, 12 guys from the Southeast now, like Oregon does, right? You're never going to do that, but you still want to get the occasional Curly Reed, Dylan Johnson, I know is from Mississippi as a transfer, but those type of guys. I mean, Joey Slackman being from upstate back east, it's like these guys are there's talent on the East Coast. You need to be able to be seen on the East Coast for those players to kind of know more about you. And this is a perfect opportunity for that.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's something where, as somebody who lived on the East Coast for a while, Washington doesn't always get that kind of attention out there. So getting on this stage, and not only getting on the stage, but doing what they've been able to do all season long, where beating Oregon twice, the Oregon State win when Oregon State was ranked in the top 10, USC, Utah, those being ranked wins, the Arizona one, as Arizona's been gaining a lot of favor recently. Getting all of that attention is so big for this program. And you're right, because it's never going to be a huge part of Washington's recruiting to go into, let's use an example in the current class, Dominic Kirk's in Ohio. They're not going to do that every year, saying, all right, we're going to go attack the state of Ohio and get 5 of the top 30 kids in that class. No, that's never going to happen. But getting a Dominic Kirks every now and again, getting a Dylan Johnson, even though he is a transfer from Mississippi State, where he definitely hadn't been like out to this part of the country to see anything like that before, but before really being recruited by Washington. That's something he's really talked about at length. And so seeing what you can get from around the country, I'm trying to think of a couple other examples where like Curly Reed is a good one, being from Louisiana. Washington has had a ton of guys from like that area of the country. Look at Keinholz, even though, that recruitment didn't necessarily go the way it was planned. Just getting a couple of those guys, you're right, just opens those doors. And just while it's not going to be super consistent, becomes a more important part of what you're doing and what you're building. And so going to Louisiana, where you get to go to this whole other part of the country, and also get your players that are from the West Coast a new experience too. I think that part of all this is really cool. But really, I am super bummed for some of the fans that might not get to experience this as of right now. Hopefully things will change just kind of on the logistics front. But as of right now, it looks like it might be really, really tough to get a whole lot of Washington fans out to this matchup.
Right. And I think that was kind of the interesting thing when I was looking at, flights last night, late Saturday night, about that, is because it's like, well, you're looking at, okay, flights from Detroit, Michigan to New Orleans, there's plenty of them, right? It's still somewhat expensive, but almost like what flying to Los Angeles would be, right? That's kind of like, okay, it's a pricey ticket, but it's not unreasonable, right? The average fan probably could find a way to afford it. Flying down to New Orleans, when I believe somebody said Alaska Airlines has 2 or 3 direct flights per day.
2 a day is, yeah.
2 a day too. And then, so now if you're Washington, okay, so now we're going to, fly to Houston and drive 7.5 hours and then drive back. And then there's so many logistical things that kind of go into it. Whereas, for the team, look, they got the charter, they're going to fly down, the team will be fine, right? They'll make that work. But Washington doesn't necessarily have a ton of fans in the South. And that's not a knock on the South or anything like that. But there's more of a likelihood of Michigan being able to travel for that game than there would be for Washington.
Right.
Cards don't fall in their favor. So you kind of but this also is an opportunity for maybe people to become Washington fans. I know it's kind of a stretch to think that, but there's plenty of opportunity for Washington to kind of just grow its fan base in general by saying, hey, you know what? We're locals, but we're going to support Washington because we hate Texas, right? So how much of, and I mean, again, I was down there for the Alamo Bowl at the Alamo Dome last year, and it kind of seemed like a 70-30 split, right? With Texas fans having 70 and Washington fans having 30. You would hope it gets more to 60-40 for this one, but because, as you pointed out with the travel, if you're the number 2 team in the country and you can only get a 20-80 split, that's kind of rough. And that's not a shot at Washington's fans. No. It's just, if you're Texas, well, you could drive. There's a number of fans that can drive from Austin to New Orleans easier than Washington fans can fly even to Texas and then drive.
No, you're absolutely right. And that was something that I just wanted to make sure we hit on just kind of as we wrap up here, because that part of it is a really tough draw. But I think this is like the biggest thing to take away from all this is that it's really exciting that Washington is on this stage, because something you and I talked about after the Pac-12 championship game, that the fact that the Huskies are able to be in the situation after what you and I had to watch in 2021, where it's just calling it an abomination, is not even close to doing justice what we had to watch with a John Donovan offense, which I never ever want to have my eyes just laid on again. It was that terrible. But this is going to be such an awesome experience for the team, for the coaching staff, and for everything surrounding the program. And I feel like this is just building towards something bigger, where it really doesn't get bigger than, winning a national championship if they're able to do that. But this, just with what Kalen DeBoer has shown that he can do in just 2 years with this program, it feels like that as long as he is at the helm of this program, that they will find a way to be in contention every single year. And I think that that's just a really exciting thing to think about, just for this fan base, for this team, and for everybody who wants to be a part of this program. And I think that it's going to grow so much over the next couple of years. And it started this season, but it can really start, because being in a playoff game, being in the Sugar Bowl, people will really be able to point to that and just say, that was the night when we really learned how good this Washington team was, if we look back on this 5-10 years down the line.
Exactly. And I mean, the craziest part, and probably a good point to end on, is I think I've shared it before on the show, where I talked to Kalen DeBoer after the Alamo Bowl, and as he was kind of walking out of the media area, and we just had a quick 2-minute conversation. And the end of it was just getting started. We're just getting started. And you can kind of see it, right? Where it's like, okay, yeah, that you really are just getting started. This is kind of the first part. And you could still almost make the case that Washington is still just getting started, right? If they win the national championship, they're kind of on their way now. But even still, it doesn't feel like this is a one-off for DeBoer in any stretch of the imagination.
I agree. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers who are blowing up the comments. We really do appreciate you showing up, especially on a Sunday afternoon when the NFL product has been great today. I don't even want to check in my fantasy matchups right now, but I'm going to save that for another time and not this show to complain about it, because I get it. Especially Lars does not care about my fantasy team whenever I talk about them. But thank you all so much for being here. And if you're new, thank you so much for tuning in. We really hope you enjoyed the product that we put out here. Please feel free to subscribe wherever you get this podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We are there. We are everywhere. We're updating this channel every single day. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. If you're audio only, leave us a 5-star review. Whatever it is you want to feel you can do to get involved with the show, we really do appreciate it. Feel free to follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever else. We are everywhere. Stay tuned for a Monday edition where we're going to be doing a crossover with our buddy Spencer McLaughlin, and he's going to be doing it from Locked On Pac-12. So we'll see what kind of Oregon thoughts we get from him. Again, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Monday.